To the Groucho's Club's Pink, Ould and Brown Book Club. My name's Madlen Davies. By day, I'm a journalist, but I'm a book lover by night. So thanks very much for coming to listen to tonight's session. I'm just going to ask everyone to mute themselves so we can focus on the discussion, but we want it to be as interactive as possible. So if you do want to ask a question, there'll be some time at the end, or if you prefer, just pop it in the chat and I'll be looking at the chat throughout the discussion so I can ask any question. And we are actually going to record the session tonight. So if you're a bit camera shy and don't want your face in the recording, feel free just to turn off your camera. And one last thing, if you're seeing subtitles at the bottom of your screen and it's too distracting and you'd rather not, you can take it off by just clicking the live transcript button at the bottom of Zoom. So just a handy tip there. So I'm absolutely delighted to introduce Georgina Lawton, who's a journalist, broadcaster, and author of Raceless. Georgina, thanks so much for coming tonight.
Thank you so much for having me.
I absolutely love the book. I feel like you did quite a difficult thing in helping us to understand the nuance of growing up with a very, very loving family, but also with this underlying tension of feeling like you don't belong and having to navigate moving through the world in your skin and being questioned and all that came with that, all alone and with no reference points. So could you just start by telling us what made you want to tell your story to begin with?
Yeah, I guess it was motivated by, what I was going through in my own personal life and sort of the weight of the secrets, the sort of hidden truth that was in my family, that was, me, that was sort of weighing on me after my dad passed away, and it sort of became this noise that I couldn't ignore anymore. And then, once I started writing about this sort of thing in The Guardian, I got lots of emails from people who had been through, similarly weird conditions of identity erasure or, finding out things about their family from DNA tests. And once I sort of got that, verification that it wasn't that strange, it sort of legitimized my experiences and then gave me the impetus to put everything that I'd written online and some other people's experiences into one sort of memoir with other people's stories as well. So that's how it came about.
And can we, just in case anyone hasn't read the book, can we start with your birth? So the family secret that the book is about. Could you describe what happened and your reflections on it now? So you put it beautifully in the book as the secret was set in concrete and that your parents kind of quietly agreed to live without mentioning race.
Yeah, so I was born to two white parents and it just never got explained as to why I didn't look like them. And I guess, that just sort of became the normal in my family for 20-something years.
And what were the consequences of that? So you describe in the book kind of walking behind your mother when you went shopping and things like that. Could you just take us through what that meant for you?
Yeah, there were all sorts of consequences, I guess. It was difficult for me to know where I belonged. It was, came between me and my mother, I guess, because we couldn't talk about the reasons that I looked the way that I did. And then, most teenagers need some sort of, they need their origin story to work out how they move through the world. And that's sort of a very human thing. So to not have that as I kind of came into my own was a bit destabilizing, and, it made me, I think, a bit more defensive than I needed to be. And, those anxieties also manifested themselves in how I presented. And, I wanted to stay out of the sun. I wanted to keep my hair straight, all the things that I think Black people growing up in white spaces go through. But I guess a lot of people know the origins of their Blackness. And because I didn't have that, it just sort of amplified everything a bit more. So especially as a teenager, it became sort of really tricky, the image that I had of myself and that lack of a story that I could tell myself and then tell to other people was really difficult.
And there's this really tender and insightful moment in the book where you describe getting therapy with your mum, and she says she kept this a secret because she was ashamed of the affair. And you said, well, if you're ashamed of the affair, then you must be ashamed of me, the child that affair produced. How long did it take you to kind of realize that that was a belief that you held, and then to express it that way?
Yeah, I think it was hearing another therapist, the therapist that I describe in the book, repeat that back to my mum, because I was saying there'd always been this sort of distance between us. You know, we didn't get on incredibly well. And I was sort of accusing my mum of you know, maintaining that distance because I reminded her of her shame. I reminded her of this affair that she'd had. And I think she definitely, you know, had turned a lot of that shame inwards into guilt, and the guilt was kind of paralyzing her, and it was stopping her from having a close relationship with me. I think it, you know, it must have come between her and my dad, although they didn't speak of it. I think it was definitely, you know, something that was difficult for them. And I think the weight of carrying all that around, yeah, definitely made my mum defensive and you know, a lot spikier than she needed to be. So going to therapy, I think she had to build those walls, sort of deconstruct those walls. And I was desperate to be heard. So I was desperate for her to understand the impact that her secret, her lie had had on me. And I was angry that she wasn't sort of moving at the speed that I was moving at, because I wanted to say all these things have happened to me because of this secret in our family, and because I've been defending your fidelity. I've been telling people that you're my mum and that you wouldn't cheat and that I'm definitely your daughter, and all these things that I'd had to carry around for 20 something years was sort of, you know, spurting out of me like a broken pipe. Like I had all these emotions, I had everything to say, and my mum was the opposite. She'd kept everything so contained for so long. So we were just on different spectrums. And, you know, I think it was a therapist that said, of course you are the way you are, Georgina, and of course your mum is the way she is because of your different experiences, but you need to hear each other. So for her to, you know, really put a name to my mum's shame and to talk about the shame that came from having an affair with a black man, and, you know, the shame that comes from, I guess, living a very Irish Catholic existence and not talking about cheating and not talking about all these things, that was very freeing to hear somebody else say it in the therapy session. And yeah, I needed to work out what everything had happened. So it was great to hear an expert, you know, give us that discourse and make me understand my mum's behaviour a bit more, and for her to understand me.
Mm-hmm. And what was it like kind of writing about that? There's quite a personal process. Did you have conversations with your family beforehand, before the book was published?
Yeah, no, I did. By the time the book came out, it was, you know, me and my mum were in a different space and she could give permission. Well, I wasn't seeking permission, but I was running things past her, shall we say, and I was going to do it anyway because I just sort of, you know, needed to speak my truth. But I did have conversations with her about the cover. You know, she's on the cover with my dad, so that was something we spoke about. And by the time the book came out, I'd already written a lot in The Guardian and online about everything. And I think at first it was difficult for her to deal with that, but, you know, that's something else we spoke about in therapy, my need to vocalize all that had happened to me. And my mum, you know, she either had to get with me or we would not have a relationship. That's sort of what my ultimatum was, because I wasn't going to stop talking about these things, because I'd had 24 years of kind of, I guess, having my identity controlled in a way. So it was a way of me taking back control.
Mm-hmm. And this idea of having your identity erased, in the book you met up with others. The one that stood out for me was Andrew Lovell, who's from the band M People, one of my favorite bands actually. And he said that he suffered from PTSD when he found out that his adoptive mother was actually his biological mother, because it sort of triggered this feeling in him that he wasn't wanted. Could you just reflect on kind of how serious the consequences are of this kind of thing?
Yeah, I think, you know, from a parental perspective, I've learned that my mum didn't think she was doing anything wrong, and often parents who obscure their child's heritage or parentage think that they're doing what's best for the family. And it also comes down to a lot of shame around the woman's choice, you know, shame around having an affair often, or shame around bringing up a black child in a very white area. There's a lot to be unpacked, but then that shame gets passed on to the child. It got passed on to me. And for Andrew Lovell, he identified as mixed race. He grew up in Deptford, so he had all these kind of, like, you know, icons and people around him that he could relate to, but he had a very white family and they just told him, you know, you're adopted. So he kind of dealt with these feelings of rejection, as a lot of adoptees do. And that's something, you know, I can't really relate to, because I had a lot of love from both my parents. I never felt like I was on the outside of any kind of family gatherings. Like, I was very much accepted. I just had all these questions. But for adoptees like Andrew, I think I can't speak for them, but you know, from what I've learned, it's a lot about that fear of rejection. You don't know who your birth mum is. You think you've been given up. So when he found out that he wasn't actually given up and that his mum was the woman that raised him, she was right in front of him all that time, it was just too much for him to handle. He had a breakdown. He had several breakdowns actually, and he talked to me about, you know, it being too much too soon. You thought your life was one thing, and then suddenly there's one little confession, and everything you thought you knew is not what it was. So I could definitely relate to that, because it's that feeling of, I guess, yeah, your origin story changing in the blink of an eye, and you learn to accept what people tell you. So even though I knew that I wasn't white, I knew that, you know, my parents might not be my parents, I learned to accept it, and it was something I repeated to other people as a way of preserving myself. And I think Andrew as well, he learned to tell people that he was adopted, and that was his origin story. So just to have it snatched back so quickly, it had a huge effect on him. And I think, speaking to lots of other people in the book who've gone through similar things, there's trends of PTSD, depression, anxiety, body image issues, all of that kind of stuff happens. I think it sort of brews over several years. And when you find out something as fundamental as, you know, who you are or who you thought you were isn't what you thought it was, it can just, yeah, amplify everything. So the weight of those secrets, even though parents think that they're making the best decision, it always weighs more heavily on the child, because the truth will come out in the end.
Mm-hmm. And there's this really, really awful part in the book where you describe how a teacher called you up in front of the whole class and kind of demanded to know why your ethnicity was marked as Caucasian. And you wrote quite very insightfully that you thought, you know, you have white parents, you have an Anglican name, and yet she still made you feel like white was this exclusive club and that you would always be defined by your Nigerian heritage. And that really kind of epitomized white privilege for me. What are your reflections on that now?
Yeah, I mean, if race was a logical category, I would be able to identify as white and black, because I have white and black heritage. But because of the way that race has been constructed, it's built around this myth of, you know, white superiority. It's exclusive, and it's based on exclusivity. So anyone with a drop of black blood will be classed as non-white. So I think my parents, in their naivety, thought that me being raised in a white household with a white surname, with my mum knowing that she's white and she gave birth to me, she probably thought, you know, this can happen, but I'm not white passing physically. Like, you know, my phenotype is not like some other mixed people who look white. I've never really been able to pass. So I don't know what my parents were thinking. But when I look back on how race is constructed, I guess, yeah, if it was a logical concept, that wouldn't be obscene. But in our society, we know that race isn't based on any sort of logic. It isn't based on, you know, like binary metrics. It's just white, exclusive, and everything else in the other category. So I think my teacher taught me a hard lesson that day, in how, you know, how whiteness is constructed. But she also taught me that, I guess, you know, I'm not going to be accepted, and I need to sort of find out more about my own heritage, because whiteness isn't a category to which I can aspire, and I shouldn't really want to, I guess. So there was, yeah, lots of mixed feelings around that. It really sent me on this sort of journey to find out the truth, and, you know, later on look into what these categories actually mean.
Mm-hmm. And the book starts with you in Nicaragua kind of looking at this DNA test. Can you just describe that moment and that journey that it sent you on?
Yeah. So when I took the tests to find out my ancestry, yeah, I was in Nicaragua, and I'd gone traveling to sort of put some space between me and my mum after I found out, you know, my dad isn't my biological dad. I confirmed that with another test. And then, you know, in the blink of an eye, I could see all these things that I'd stopped myself from doing because I didn't want to look too black, whatever that means. So I'd stop myself from getting my hair done properly. I'd stop myself from, you know, going to certain nights out or talking to certain people and making certain friends, because I'd been so afraid that that would, I guess, anchor me more into a black community to which I had no knowledge of, and I had no, I guess, immediate connection. But obviously all my life people had been saying, oh, you know, this is where you fit in, this is for you. But I'd become complicit in this secret, I guess. So once I got my ancestry results back, it was a huge moment. It just gave me confirmation that I had heritage in Africa. I guess I'd heard so many predictions from people over the years that I really wasn't sure what it was going to say. Like, I'd heard people say that I looked like I have, you know, Indian heritage, and other people had seen all kinds of mixes in me, and I just didn't know. So when I got the confirmation that I was, you know, definitely 50% African, that was huge. And when it said Nigerian, I was like, okay, great. Like, you know, I've got Black British friends from London who are really proud to be Nigerian. Like, I guess that was a starting point, but it was difficult for me to immediately find, I guess, like an identity in that word, because I've never been to Nigeria. I still don't have like a close Nigerian relative. And I think being able to identify proudly as Nigerian comes from, you know, family osmosis, being around people who teach you traditions, who really imbue you with that sense of pride. And, you know, my mum can't give me that. Like, even when I got the results back, she wasn't particularly enthralled with what it said. And I think it's a shock for her, because she'd raised me in her mind to be like her. She'd raised me in a white family, and this was confirmation that I will get identified as a Black woman as I move through the world. So she had to really come to terms with some of her internalized anti-Blackness, which is really, you know, hard thing to tell your mother when she's just sort of disengaged from it. So I had to do a lot of the work on my own, and I had to leave her where she was and go off and travel and just see myself in spaces that reflected me, and, you know, read more widely, and really sort of deconstruct my own anti-Blackness, because that had come from not acknowledging who I was, and that had come from a large part of my upbringing. So I really had to do the work on myself before I could go home and, you know, ask my mum to join me.
Mm-hmm. And has that led to a kind of a sense in pride in your new identity, in your, you know, in this story that you have of not knowing your identity and then discovering it?
Yeah, you know, it's still very much a work in progress. Like, I think psychologically, it took a few years to just really adjust and to realize that, you know, I don't have as much white privilege as I thought I did. Like, yeah, I know I really had to leave that behind, but then moving through spaces and realizing that I actually have, you know, a large amount of white privilege as a Black person that's grown up in a white home, and all the sort of benefits that that's brought me, societal, financial. Like, you know, I had to really kind of think about my place in the world, and think about what it meant to be a Black woman who was mixed, who was raised in a white house, and, you know, do some reading around other people's experiences that mirrored mine, adoptees, you know, transracial adoptees, read fiction by women, you know, Black women and mixed women around the world. Just really adjusting my mindset was the first step. And then I think, yeah, sort of putting my ideas down on paper was really helpful. And identity wise, yeah, I think it's still a work in progress. I'm very proud to be identified as a Black woman, a mixed race Black woman. But I often feel like this sort of pressure to disclose that, you know, I was raised in a white home, and that's still something that I feel is very much kind of in my mind when people ask me to be, you know, a representative of certain views or to speak on certain issues. I'm very aware that I can't, you know, there's not everything that I can speak to because of my specific experience. I'm just here to, you know, give weight to my specific experience and people like me, but I'm not necessarily trying to be a representative for, you know, like, you know, all Black voices in the writing world, because it's not something that I feel is fair to put on me.
And you talked in the book about finding a kind of synthesized identity that wouldn't mean rejecting ties with your white family. I'd never really heard that before. Is that kind of common? People feel like they have to kind of reject ties with a white family in order to identify with another part of their heritage?
I don't know, actually, but I know there's a lot of discourse going on now about how mixed people should identify, and I think we're very much at the beginning of conversations around mixedness. It's something that, you know, I'm still trying to work out my opinion on. Like, I think everybody should be able to identify with the parts of their heritage that they feel fit, but sometimes, you know, leaning into my mixedness more, does that separate me from, I guess, causes within the Black community that are quite important to me? It's still something, yeah, I'm thinking of quite deeply, because a lot of Black writers who look like me will just identify as Black. They don't really sort of lean into their mixedness, but there's a certain privilege that comes with being mixed and Black. So it's something that, yeah, I still feel a responsibility to talk about. And I think, yeah, we're very much at the start of these conversations about being mixed. We've got my book, we've got another one called Mixed Other, which is by Natalie Morris at the Metro, and we've got one called Biracial Britain that's just come out. So I don't know how everybody feels about, you know, their identities and whether or not they feel it should be a synthesized process. But for me, it was important to not reject everything that I'd been brought up around, because I had two loving parents from a white home. But at the same time, I really had to deconstruct the anti-Blackness that had come from that. So that's why, for me, a synthesized kind of identity works, and why, you know, I'm happy for people to identify me as mixed. I'm happy to be identified as Black, and just speak to the experience of it being both. You know, I really know what it's like to be raised as a white child, because that was my reality. But I also know what it's like to be raised and be identified as a mixed race person, because that was also my reality. And then in some spaces I'll move around and I'll be just identified as Black. And I think a lot of people who are monoracial or just of one background, they don't understand that, or they find that, you know, we're picking sides. But that's just it. That's the existential experience that comes with being mixed for a lot of people. So I'm just trying to, I guess, speak to that and have people understand that a bit more.
Mm-hmm. And you said that as a teenager, you'd become aware that you were, in your words, positioned at the bottom of a beauty hierarchy that values straight hair, blue eyes, and white skin. What's it like now, kind of living in that culture? And simultaneously, is there also a kind of fetishization, that's a mouthful of a word, of Blackness and Black culture? I'm thinking specifically of kind of Miley Cyrus openly saying she took on features of Black culture, like twerking, to, you know, reimagine herself.
Yeah, again, it's a really interesting conversation. It sort of centers mixedness as well. I guess, yeah, like the boundaries of who is Black will change depending on context and community and culture. So in my upbringing, I was the Black one, the darkest one in my friendship group. I felt like I was, you know, bottom of the pile. I wasn't chosen because I was living in an extremely white area with extremely, you know, white friends, and there just wasn't that diversity, and there wasn't that sort of, what I say in the book is a, you know, a racial mirror. I didn't have people that looked like me reinforcing that it was okay to have dark skin and curly hair, and it was, you know, also beautiful to have these features. I didn't have any of that. So for me, I was just the darkest one. But then, of course, growing up and making friends with Black women, Nigerian women, Ghanaian women, suddenly I found I stepped into this really distasteful, you know, hierarchy, beauty hierarchy, whereby there's colorism. So someone of my skin tone or my hair texture will be further up than somebody who's got darker skin. And that was a real mindfuck to navigate the two, having been, you know, I guess, denigrated for my appearance somewhat in a white space, and then moving to more diverse spaces and seeing that actually the opposite takes effect. And I guess what I learned from writing the book and traveling to Black spaces is, you know, beauty is too fragile a concept for women to place their value on, and it's too fragile a concept for Black women to really feel like they are valued on that. So it changes wherever you go. Just like, you know, the definition of who is Black changes wherever you go. It changes depending on context and community. So yeah, it's a really interesting time, because I feel like we see white influencers and white celebrities gain a certain level of cultural cachet when they sort of cash in on Black features or Black trends. And I don't know if anyone saw the kind of blackfishing saga on Instagram, which is where white influencers were, you know, really tanning themselves and wearing curly wigs, wearing braids, and trying to appear Black, but trying to appear mixed, because there's more, I guess, cachet with looking mixed than there is with looking extremely dark-skinned in some circles. So they knew that they could cash in on their kind of mixedness if they bought into that, but they were actually white. So I think we're still living in an era where colorism is very much at play, and we can see that with the type of Blackness that is at the forefront of the media. And I think mixedness, I think people who are mixed need to be aware that, you know, also we are now going to be potentially seen as the most palatable form of Blackness, and that's really, really problematic.
And you talked about not having this racial mirror. And I guess, do you think people are taking it seriously, having diversity on TV and the things we read in politics, business, in all industries? I feel like for all the efforts that are made, there are still people that say, this is the percentage of minorities in the UK, therefore to be representative, we only need this amount in politics, etc., etc. What would you say to that?
Yeah, I don't know much about the diversity schemes at, the highest levels of media. I know that the industry that I work in is, over 90% white, publishing's over 90% white, and it's majority male and it's majority Oxbridge educated people. So I think, the speed that we're moving at is still not fast enough, especially in the media and book world that I can speak on. There seems to be a push, I guess, to publish more Black stories and uplift more Black voices, but we see that it comes about at really traumatic times. So it will come about when Meghan Markle's talking about race and trauma, and it will come about when another Black body has been taken by the police in the States, and then suddenly everybody wants to talk about it and everyone wants to do Black squares, but give it a month and the news cycle's moved on. So I don't know if it's lasting change. I feel like it's a really great time to be a writer because it feels like our stories are moving to the forefront, but whether or not it lasts, beyond 1 or 2 years, I don't know. I can see better representation certainly than when I was, an intern at this magazine that I mentioned in the book, 5, 6 years ago. But I'd like to see Black and brown people brought forward to discuss things other than racial trauma. I'd like to see, people compensated for their time when producers and radio hosts, ring us up and say, oh, we're working on this great documentary about diversity, can I just pick your brain? Well, no, that's consulting. So there's definitely a drive to tell these stories, but I think the way that we're telling them also needs to be carefully monitored.
Mm-hmm. And you said yourself you went on this kind of journey of reading and getting therapy and kind of confronting your own anti-Blackness and your mother's. What advice would you give for other people on that journey? Where should they start? What should they read? And how should they approach it?
Yeah, do you know, I get a lot of questions from parents like, how should I talk to my child about race? And I'm like, I don't have babies, like I just have a dog, like that's it. So I don't like giving parenting advice, but I can say to them that, to raise their child in a home in which they feel safe and which they feel able to voice any concerns, where they feel comfortable enough to ask questions around difference, that's so key. And when they realize that there is difference there, maybe they're the only person in their home that looks like them, just teaching them that that difference is good and it's nothing to be ashamed of, and that it can actually be a strength in a very homogenous setting. All of that will really imbue them with this sense of pride. And also, yeah, racial mirrors, that's really important. Like, I didn't have parents that bought me a black doll. I didn't have parents that would, I guess, surround me with other mixed kids. They didn't think of that. And I think they thought that, love and affection was enough. And in many ways, it was fantastic, but I could really have done with some people that looked like me in my life just to show me that that was okay. And when I started researching all of this, I realized my experiences were similar to that of adoptees and transracial kids. And I think some sociological papers are a really good point to start reading. I read a great one called Being Raised by White People, and I would advise, parents and kids to read that and really see what it's like to be raised in a white home when you are of colour. There's lots of sort of interviewees who talk about their experiences. There's a lot of parents, and then there's a lot of sociological discourse which really legitimizes, what we're going through, because for so many years I just didn't have the words. I had this word transracial in my head a couple of years ago, and I was like, oh wait, that speaks to my experience, because all it is a household where a black or a brown kid has likely been raised by a white parent. So like just having the language to even describe what is going on is key. So yeah, I would definitely say some of those papers online, sociological papers, are really useful. And then reading other non-fiction kind of polemics. Natives by Carla was great. Afua Hirsch's British, that was like hugely influential on my writing. And then I was just getting history books in, like Black and British by David Olusoga. That's really great, just to sort of realise that, Black people have been in this country for years and their contribution is vast. And we had, you know, Black people who were trumpeters in the court of Henry VIII. All that stuff was just really instrumental in me really navigating the world as a Black woman and really, you know, developing a sense of pride in that. Also, yeah, Renee Eden Lodge's Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People. That's like, you know, foundational. And just, yeah, finding texts that speak to the British experience, because there's a lot of American texts as well that I've referenced in my book, but those ones that I've just named, I guess I read around the time I was writing Raceless, and they were really, really useful for me and just useful in, you know, helping me understand my place in the world.
And you described in your book that your friends were really supportive and they felt like genuine allies. I know that word has become a bit kind of cliched and loaded, but how did that look? What was it about their actions that was truly supportive rather than performative?
Yeah, I guess just encouraging me to seek out the truth. You know, when I had my DNA test results and my mum couldn't talk about what that meant, my best friends were imploring me to carry on. They were saying that, you know, your mum's going to have to come clean with whatever she knows. You need to get to the bottom of this. And even when I was, you know, broke at the time, I think my best friend lent me the money for one of the DNA tests so I could actually get it processed. So, you know, this is very specific stuff that is very specific to me, but actual support, you know, beyond just words, beyond kind of, you know, I'm here if you need, that's not helpful, but actions like that really do speak volumes. And then, you know, like reflecting sometimes on their own behavior. I've had friends that have said silly things over the years when we were kids, and as I've started writing, they've come forward and said, you know, I'm really sorry to recall that I said these things. And, you know, that period of reflection is really, really tricky for a lot of white people. And I think it can feel overwhelming when somebody suddenly starts talking about all their experiences around race that maybe they've kept suppressed for so long, but they need to feel a bit uncomfortable, I think, in order to be a good ally, whatever that really means. But they need to be uncomfortable to do that work. And just, if they're uncomfortable, like, you know, think how uncomfortable we've been taking up space in a white area that maybe wasn't built with our comfort in mind. So I think, yeah, having honest, open dialogues with friends and actually doing things that help with your actions rather than just words, that's definitely key. And that's something that my friends were able to do for me.
Mm-hmm. And in the book, you describe how angry you were when in that therapy session, your mum said, you know, but I didn't even see you as Black, or I didn't even see your race. Can you just describe kind of why that made you so angry?
Yeah, it's just really harmful, isn't it, to have somebody say, I don't see your race, as if it's not an important part of my identity, as if it's not the whole reason why we're here in this therapy session in the first place. You know, my mum has perfect eyesight. Nobody in that room is you know, not able to see clearly. So for someone to say, I don't see your race, is a way of trying to negate it. It's a way of trying to reduce it. And I didn't want it reduced. I don't want it reduced. I want to celebrate what it means to be me. I want to celebrate what it means to be Black and mixed, and I want my mum to do the same. So overlooking my race as a way to accept it was no longer acceptable. So I did get very angry at that comment, and I think having the therapist there to explain to my mum, because I think all she could hear from me was rage, having another therapist there to explain to my mum what that meant was key. But it was also, you know, I remember feeling disappointed because everything I was saying the therapist would repeat, but my mum could only hear another white woman repeat it for her, and she wasn't hearing it when it came from me. So that was definitely hard as well, because we need to get better at believing Black and brown people when they say this is what is racist or this is what is harmful. We don't need it to be explained to you by another white person with a degree. You need to listen to our lived experience as well. So all of that was, you know, made the therapy rooms really, really complex. But I remember having that conversation with my mum and her understanding by the end of the session why, you know, I don't see your colour was just a really harmful statement, although I guess it was well-meaning. And I just think, yeah, it personifies a lot of the way that the UK has handled race discussions. We kind of think that it's best not to say anything about race, otherwise we might offend people. Let's just pretend we're all colourblind, but that's not the solution, because it just keeps people separate and distant from one another, when really there's nothing wrong with naming somebody's identity. And And also it kind of, you know, gives the impression that whiteness is the ultimate identity to which we should all be aspiring. Oh, let's all be, you know, raceless. And that's not what I wanted. Like, I called the book Raceless because it's what I don't want, basically. Raceless is the sort of impression that you get when you live in a world in which race isn't acknowledged. You feel like a part of you is scrubbed out. You feel like your identity is erased. You feel like you have no race when people constantly pretend they don't see it. So that's why it's really important to name it and, you know, to see it so you can be fully heard and fully understood.
And in the book, you kind of admit that most of your anger was directed at your mum because you wanted to keep your dad as, you wanted to keep the kind of love between you and didn't want that to be tarnished. Is that still your position now?
Yeah, I think I had no choice really, because my dad wasn't around, so my mum did bear the brunt of it. But I think talking to therapists made me realise that, you know, he wasn't perfect, and my parents were complicit in this kind of silence around identity, and it wasn't a deliberate thing that they did to hurt me. It was more they weren't able to talk about where my blackness had come from. It had come from my mum's infidelity, and they weren't able to have that discussion between themselves. So because they were both sort of taking the easy route out to protect their marriage in not talking about it, that then transferred a lot of pain and shame and hurt to me. But when we started talking about it, my dad wasn't there, so I couldn't vocalize any of those anxieties with him. And I also learned, you know, from writing online in 2017, 18, that what my dad did was a huge act of generosity. And I didn't think of that when he was raising me. He was just my dad. And I was angry that I couldn't thank him for staying. And I was angry that we hadn't spoken about this. And I was angry that he never brought it up with me because, you know, he loved me so much. He didn't say anything. That's what I have deduced. But I also deduced that it was awkward for him and it was painful. So there was a lot mixed up in my parents' silence. There's a lot of love there, but there was also a lot that I wish they hadn't done as a way of, you know, protecting their own marriage. And to work through all those emotions when my dad wasn't there, it was, you know, the most painful thing I've ever done. And I understand that my dad was complicit and that he did what he did because he thought it was best for the family. And I also understand that, you know, most men would have walked out. Most men wouldn't have stuck around to raise a kid that obviously wasn't theirs. So he was definitely a special person. And I was angry at my mum for not helping us, you know, reach that conclusion when he was around. But I understand, I guess, why my parents did what they did.
Yeah, the kind of love that you describe really shines through the book. And the ending, where you all come together as a family, just is feels like a very kind of happy conclusion, although I know, you know, all these issues aren't ever going to be concluded. How has your wider family reacted to the book?
Yeah, do you know what? That's been interesting. It's still kind of ongoing. I've got my auntie in Ireland saying that she was, you know, upset with a piece that I did because it featured an image of me and my grandfather. And it's a bit disappointing because now I can see my mum, how far my mum has come now. She's removed herself from those sort of feelings of shame and embarrassment. She's come such a long way, and she's defending me to her family in Ireland and saying, well, Georgina's allowed to write about what she wants. And I never thought she would have been able to do that. So with my auntie's reaction, I can see how far my mum has come. But it's been interesting because, you know, I haven't really said much negative about Ireland. I've said that there's been times where I've endured racism, but there's been, you know, a lot of happy memories spent in County Clare with my family. And, you know, Ireland's a big part of my origin story. That's something I'm really proud of. So I wrote this piece the other week in the Irish Independent, and it was mainly positive, but it did reflect on some racial trauma in Ireland. And I used a picture of me and my grandfather, and then, you know, my mum was getting a call, oh, we're not happy with that photo because he's not around anymore. We're not happy with the family photo that you put on the farm. And it's like, oh, here I am talking about race and really important things that are going on in Ireland, and your biggest concern is a photo that I've used of me with my own family. Like, it's just a bit disappointing. So that's kind of, yeah, still going on in the background. And it's not something I anticipated, because I deliberately, you know, didn't say anything negative about aunties or uncles. I've just spoken in quite general terms. And there's not really anything to say about my aunties and uncles. You know, they didn't speak about race, but that's, you know, they copied my parents. There wasn't any specifics that I've left out of the book about them. I've just written honestly, and I've just used pictures that I'm happy with. So it's really interesting to hear. I guess it just comes from a place of discomfort, me naming things that they would rather just stay silenced. It makes them uncomfortable, but that's unfortunately not my issue.
So their issue was just with the use of the photo, and there was no kind of engagement with the race issues.
Yeah, there's no engagement with the race issues at all. So it kind of, you know, I think speaks to the fact that they're uncomfortable with the whole thing. They're uncomfortable with me talking about race and racism in Ireland. I think the photo is just sort of a proxy for that, but it's neither here nor there really. Like, it's not something that I'm gonna take into consideration, especially because they haven't said anything to me. They've just gone through my mum. So it's really interesting to see my mum kind of defend me because of this thing that I never thought she'd be able to sort of be on my side with. That's been a nice sort of side effect of everything, having my mum come on this journey and seeing her change as a person. It's been really, really great.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that kind of change is possible without like long periods of therapy? I'm just wondering, for other people who kind of might want to see those changes, what you think the best process is to follow.
Yeah, do you know what? I don't know if we'd be in the same position we are now if we hadn't gone to therapy. And that's, you know, not necessarily helpful for people that can't afford it or can't access it. But it really did work wonders for my mental health, and to have my mum, you know, let go of a lot of shame and a lot of pain and a lot of anti-blackness. Like, that was really, really key for my mum, I think, to have somebody else explain these issues. It was another white female who was kind of, you know, similar age to my mum. And I think she really responded really well to that. She was a fantastic therapist, but I think for my mum, it was key to have someone like her talking to her on her level. And for me, it was key to really let go a lot of internalized trauma and pain. So I don't know if we could have got there without therapy. I think for people that are going through these situations with family members, maybe they're the only one that looks like them, or maybe they're adopted. If you can't get your family to come on board with you, you've just unfortunately got to do the work on your own. Like, you know, they might always be stuck in their ways if you can't bring them to therapy, but you can change and you can do the work on yourself if you remove yourself, if you go and read widely, if you go and live somewhere where you feel, you know, seen and appreciated and loved. You can always control, you know, your own emotions and your own thoughts. So it's difficult because, you know, no one wants to cut their family out, but if you can't bring people with you, I always say just focus on what you can change.
Sure. And what's next for you? Are you planning a new book?
Yeah, so I've got a travel guide coming out actually for Black women in July, and that kind of was a really joyful, fun way to write about all my experiences and recommend places that other solo travelers should go to, and talk about, you know, the positive racialized aspects of being a Black female traveler and, you know, going to Black countries. That's been really transformative for me. So I've got this book coming out in July called Black Girls Take World. So I'm really excited to talk about that. And yeah, I'm working on a fiction project now as well. So I'm quite done with talking about myself. I've always wanted to do fiction. So yeah, that's what I'm working on. I think it will be, you know, a story of a Black female trying to work her stuff out. So it won't be too far removed from some of what I've gone through, but it'll be nice to, yeah, have a bit more freedom with writing and just sort of see where it takes me with a story that I'm not kind of, you know, confined to telling because it's my own. It will be something a bit different.
Amazing. Well, this is just my kind of personal reflection, but I thought the personal story really kind of cut through a lot more than, you know, hearing you tell your story and how painful and difficult it was growing up in those circumstances. It was just such a powerful way to hear it in a way that, you know, a sort of drier book about the research couldn't have been. So just a reflection on that. I think we're going to have some questions now from the audience. So if we could unmute everyone, or I've got some questions here in chat if people are a bit shy. So I'll go straight to this one in chat. This is from Orna. Do you think Ireland is less open than the UK in terms of cultural acceptance?
Yeah, I guess it is. Which is strange because when you touch down in Ireland, you immediately feel kind of welcomed in a way that I guess British people just aren't very good at. Just generally, it's such a friendly country, and Galway and Dublin, they're always at the top of world's friendliest cities. I just read another piece about this the other week, and London never is. So it's a weird kind of paradox because it's on one hand very warm, very welcoming, no matter where you're from. But on the other hand, I think they're so much further behind with discussions on diversity and privilege, just because they haven't had, the immigration story that the UK has had, because they weren't presiding over half the world and imprisoning and enslaving people. Like, that's why they don't have as many people of color living in Ireland. But we do see a huge kind of exodus from West Africa to kind of Limerick and Ennis and all those places now, which has been really interesting to see. Like, when I go back, I'm seeing just groups of people that I would never see, like Black people in Limerick. I remember the first time I saw someone, I was like, what is going on? Like, it just wasn't a thing that I saw growing up. And I kind of get double takes from them because, I'm out with all my white family and they're probably thinking, how is this? You don't see people mixing as much in Ireland. They're probably thinking, how is this kind of relationship come about? So I think, yeah, Ireland's definitely a lot more behind, but it's been interesting to see it change over the last few years. It's been interesting to see, hip hop music videos filmed in the Borough and in County Clare, like all these kind of combinations of culture that I never thought I'd see, is happening now. And I think Ireland has come such a long way with women's rights and with abortion rights and with diversity. And I'm really hopeful that, that trend will continue. But I think the UK is definitely deeply racist, if not more so than Ireland, but we're just a little bit further ahead, I think, with discussions on diversity. That's what I think.
And did you watch the interview with Harry and Meghan? And did you see the palace's response? And what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I did watch it. And I think, for me, Meghan's discussion on being the only person of colour in an all-white family, I really resonated with that, with just, the idea of not being heard or not being helped when you're experiencing race, not having your race seen, not having your racialized experiences legitimized. I could definitely relate to some of that. And I think how great that she's got Harry to hear her and elevate those experiences, because when you're on your own, it's really lonely. And the palace's response, it's like racial gaslighting 101. They're saying, oh, recollections may vary. Well, Meghan's friend came out and said, our recollections don't vary. We've got the receipts, we've got the texts, we've got the emails. So I reckon there's more that will come out. And I don't think she's exaggerating what's gone on, because if you look at the UK and how much of a race problem we do have, that really starts from the top and bleeds down. And of course, the royal family that's built their entire legacy on the oppression and subjugation of Black and brown communities, of course they're going to have a race problem at the heart of their family, and that is trickling down into the structures of the UK. So it wasn't really surprising what Meghan was saying, but I could definitely relate to that feeling of isolation when you're, the only one in a white family. And I think it's nice, that she has Harry to fight her corner a little bit.
And another question from the audience: do you consider London home? Because I think you now live in Portugal.
Yeah, so I'm in Lisbon at the minute, just because it's very peaceful and it's very warm and it's a nice place to write. And I can live on my own and not have extortionate rent, which I can't do in London. But I do have plans to return to London, because that's where I feel most at home. And I guess, my mum's still there, my brother's still there, and I might move home for a little bit, because, things are fine with us now. So I could definitely live at home for a while if I needed to. But I'd like to move back and move in with a friend or something. That's the overall plan, hopefully by the end of the year. And who knows, when things will be open or closed or whatever. But I think London's definitely where I feel most at home.
Nice. Yeah, I think you were telling us before in the green room how you'd escaped lockdown for a while in Portugal, but now it's sadly hit you.
Yes, yeah, I thought I was going to get away with it, but no, Portugal's had a huge spike in cases since January. So it went into lockdown sort of a month after the UK, and I think we're all going to come out of it around the same time. But just because it's nice and warm here, it doesn't feel as sort of bleak as maybe being in London at winter, but then I don't have all the connections of friends and family. So, there's definitely a trade-off.
We touched on this a bit earlier, but I'm just thinking our organisation today is putting out a statement withdrawing from the Society of Editors' awards because of their, in my opinion, sort of laughable statement about there being no racism in the British media. Did you see that statement, and how did you feel about it?
Yeah, I think it's obscene, but I think we also forget that, conversations around racism, white people have a different definition of what racism is. So they can pretend that the headlines they've written about Meghan don't come from racial bias. They can pretend that, casual racism, as somebody said on TV the other day, isn't actually as bad as, normal racism, whatever that even means. People aren't attuned to the reality of what it means to be a non-white person in a majority white country. So before we even sort of, unpack the headlines and the media coverage around Meghan, we need to get more realistic about what racism even looks like in this country. And we need to get better at listening to people, and we need to believe them when we say, I find that person offensive because it's rooted in racist stereotypes, or, XYZ. We're just not even at that point where we can even all agree on what racism is. So that's why they've issued that statement, because I guess they can defend it, but we need to really unpack that the whole concept of being racialized as Black, the whole concept of, me being asked to identify as white because that's the norm. We need to really unpack where that history comes from, and who constructed these categories and who it benefits. That's the starting point that we need to really work from. And once we all agree that racial categories in themselves are racist, then we can actually start to unpack all these stereotypes around people like Meghan Markle, and why that's really harmful. So yeah, the Society of Editors is a joke, and the statement was a joke, but I think they can get away with it because they can just pretend to be blind to the history of all those archetypes. But I don't know how much longer that can go on for, really, because people are, rightly furious that we're pretending still that these things aren't racist. It's a ridiculous game. We play it every time something happens in the media. Is this racist? Is this not? And it's just completely fruitless until we agree, the starting point of which all these racist concepts have begun.
And you talked in the book about confronting some of your housemates on racist comments that they've made, and how that was a difficult process. Does it become easier kind of making those confrontations as you become more practiced, or is it just a kind of tiring, all the burden is on you to explain how someone's hurt you?
Yeah, it definitely gets easier as you become more confident in yourself. I think when I first started trying to talk to those, weird people that I lived with, I was 23, 24. I didn't have the confidence in myself. I wasn't even sure, what I found offensive and what I wanted to identify as. So there was definitely a feeling, deep within me that was unsettled by their comments, but I couldn't vocalize it in a way that I can now, just because I wasn't in my right power, shall we say. And I think as you get older, you learn how to call things out quicker. You learn how to deal with things. I think if I was in that situation now, I would, make a little racist diary, write down the days in which they said what they said, and have the receipts. So when you challenge them, they don't have anything to say because you've kept the evidence. And we shouldn't have to do that, but that's something that I would do if I was 23 and living in an uncomfortable situation like that again. I think as I've got older, I've got better at, judging people's characters as well. So maybe I wouldn't live with those types of people again. And I think as I've been on my own journey, friends and family have learned a lot more about, race and privilege. And I would hope that they would be involved in those conversations, or I'd have more support at this stage in my life as well. So yeah, it definitely gets easier as people, I think, become more confident and more educated in the realities of being Black or brown in Britain.
Did you always feel compelled to write?
Yes, absolutely. I think I'm saying to my dad when I was, like 6 years old, I'm going to be an author when I'm older. And he was like, okay, that sounds good, but there's not much money in it. So I got a lot of encouragement from my parents. And this is one thing I also learned talking to lots of, second or third generation immigrants from other parts of the world. They were told that they had to maybe aspire to a serious career, and I didn't have that from my parents. It was very much, oh, be what you want to be. And that was nice to have that support, I think, because I always knew that I was good at writing, but I think a lot of childhood ambition comes from constant encouragement and constant nurturing in that passion. And I definitely have parents that did that. My dad would always read to me, he would help me write little stories. He would put on the voices when we were, doing bedtime stories for Road Doll. He was really, really hands-on, and he was really, a great teacher as well. He taught me to read. I think even before I went to school, I could read and write because he sat me down and did the alphabet with me and did all the stuff that teachers do like a year later. So he was so instrumental in me developing that talent. And my mum was so supportive and would always encourage me, and they were always there, school plays, all of that. So yeah, I feel really lucky that I had that, and I don't think I would be a writer if I hadn't had all that support. And it's just kind of, growing up and comparing my childhood to others, I was really, really lucky in that way. And it's something I think I will definitely try and get more involved in, like children's charities, literacy charities, all that kind of stuff, because not everybody does have parents that have the time to do the homework and the time to sit down and teach them how to read and write. But I did, and I think that's a huge reason in why I am a writer today. I did have a backup plan. I didn't have a backup plan, but I did once go for a job as a recruitment consultant.
Sort of the job that everyone looks at when they...
I think I was just tempted by the salary, but also my dad was really ill at the time, and I was thinking, how am I going to earn money? How am I going to support myself if my dad's not around? So it came from this place of fear. And I just remember my dad saying to me, you need to do what you like. You need to do what you love. So I had him looking out for me even when he was quite ill. So yeah, if he wasn't in my life, if my mum, hadn't been the way she was, I don't think I would have turned out as a writer or an author. So it's been yeah, a good kind of side effect from growing up in the home that I grew up in.
Well, thank you so much. It's been so amazing. The book is so brave and so kind of self-aware about all these difficult emotions, and you describe them and really make us understand, how it felt to grow up in that circumstance. And so thank you so much for writing it in the first place, and then for being here tonight and talking about it. So this is the one of the last sessions, and we may in a few months be able to actually meet at the Groucho Club, although now I've said that I've probably jinxed it, so don't hold me to that. So next in April we've got another session that will be virtual, and then watch that space, watch for the Groucho email to come, and it may be that we can host a session in the actual club, but we'll see. Thank you very much everyone for coming tonight. I know it's a very cold evening, and yet we're all nice and warm and listening to some fantastic books. So see you all next month.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.